course.
Well, so here we are. We're on our final. It says session 4. I think it's meant to say session 5. Walk in the wilderness, examining our inner life. So you'll need to indulge me a little bit. I'm basically at this point, I'm just kind of sharing with you the things that I really love, and some of it is from when I was a kid. So it's just a chance for me to have a glorified show and tell, really. But we've been slightly charting that in this idea of the wilderness, or perhaps it's for us, it's the lockdown and this last year, we were observing more carefully the world 2 weeks before, and then we were observing or studying the text last week of the Bible or whatever. And then this week it's about a kind of introspection, what's going on inside us, which is a very Lent theme that you're meant to be sort of self-examining and so on. Sounds quite heavy duty, but this idea that we have a kind of world or an inner life that we need to sort of take care of as well. So that's part of what we're thinking about today. I'm going to start with the Bible reading from the prophet Jeremiah. So this is what it says in Jeremiah 19. Thus says the Lord, cursed are those who trust in mere mortals and make mere flesh their strength, whose hearts turn away from the Lord. They shall be like a shrub in the desert and shall not see when relief comes. They shall live in the parched places of the wilderness, in an uninhabited salt land. Blessed are those who trust in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord. They shall be like a tree planted by water, sending out its roots by the stream. It shall not fear when heat comes, and its leaves shall stay green. In the year of drought it is not anxious, it does not cease to bear fruit. The heart is devious above all else, it is perverse. Who can understand it? I, the Lord, test the mind and search the heart, to give to all according to their ways, according to the fruit of their doings. So this passage is one of many that across the Bible more or less say the same thing, which is that our inner life is often described as the heart. So it's not literally our beating heart that pumps blood around us, but the kind of that's where maybe where the ancient people thought it was located. But our soul or our being is our heart, and it says that if we turn from God, then it's like we are living in a parched wilderness. Our hearts are, struggling and starving and kind of shriveling. But if we are turning to God and trusting in Him, our hearts become a tree planted by water, sending out its roots by the stream, and it flourishes and there's fruit. And then there's this other comment that the heart is devious. And it's interesting that this idea comes up again and again, is that we can't know ourselves very well. We try to work out why we do the things we do or think the things we do. We might be able to get somewhere with it. Perhaps we have people like counselors or psychotherapists to help us, but our kind of deepest inner motives and our inner workings are still somewhat hidden from us. It's kind of can be a dark place, and it's God that can see all of our hearts, and He sees all the mechanics of it and all the cogs whirring, and He understands us. And that's quite a terrifying thought in one sense, because it means we need help. It also is quite a comforting thought, because it means there's somebody out there who's able to help us when we feel a bit lost, especially in our inner world. So that's a kind of introduction to sort of roughly what the Bible teaches about these sort of things. And then I'm going in reverse order. I'm going to start with Edward Hopper. So this is a painting by the American artist Edward Hopper, and it's called Office in a Small City, 1953. Now, I'm a big fan of Edward Hopper. I studied him for my GCSEs and did my final project about him. So again, it's just a chance for me to kind of share something that's close to my heart. And he had a way of painting people. It's quite odd. It might be a little bit bleak, depending how you look at it. And he would often paint them alone, or pondering, pensive, thoughtful, and often framed by windows and in kind of urban places, so that it made them look a bit like they were sort of trapped or in prison. And there was quite a funny thing going around at the start of the last lockdown on the internet. People were saying, we are all Edward Hopper paintings now. These paintings that he painted now feel, you know, quite real, because we're all a bit locked up inside. We're all having to sit around trying to work out what's going on. We're separated from people by social distancing. So this one is the one that I sort of picked for the pack. This chap, it says it's office in a small city. We don't really know if he's at work or at home, which feels a bit like the lockdown. There are days when I can't work out if I'm at work or at home, when you're stuck in. It's not clear on his desk what he's doing. His face is obscured. He's looking away. We can't really see his expression. It seems blank, but we can't really see. What is he looking at? Is he, you know, wondering his existence? Is he bored? Is he even praying or considering his inner life? So this is the painting I showed, but that I chose. But here are some other Edward Hopper ones you may recognize if you know his art. This one on the left is called Room in Brooklyn, I think. And can you see again? There's a lady looking out of a window, or we don't actually know. Her head is bowed. Someone wondered if she was reading a book or looking at something in her lap. And the colors around the chair and her dress, you know, are very similar to the kind of carpet and table next to her. She's kind of almost camouflaged, just kind of part of the furniture. What is she doing, you know, indoors, and she's looking out the window, nobody else around. It's kind of left to us to try to work it out. The lady on the right, this is Automat, I think. Automat. And she's having a drink, a coffee. It looks like it might be at night. She might be tired from work. But again, it's very difficult for us to discern what's exactly going on. What's the story that's led her here? What's she going to do next? She's pensive, she's thoughtful, contemplating, you know, what's happening. So again, we are all Edward Hopper paintings now. Then here's a couple more. Lady looking out of a window. Oh, yeah. And if you recognize that one. And this one on the right has two people in the picture, but they sort of seem socially distanced, and kind of not having anything to do with each other. And again, their faces are shadowed, and we don't really know what their relationship is. You know, are they a couple or are they strangers? Someone on Tuesday made the good point that his paintings are like a bit voyeuristic, as in normally a painting is composed and set, and you know, it's there for us to admire. But Edward Hopper's paintings are almost a bit like photographs of people who don't know they've been photographed. With sort of, you know, CCTV camera catching glimpses of them through windows. It's quite unsettling, quite odd. And this is probably the most famous one of his, Nighthawks, where again, there's lots of open space in the painting. There are people there, but we don't have any sense that they're really relating to each other. Even the couple who look like they might be together, you know, are sort of not really looking at each other. They sort of look a bit bored. You know, what's the relationship? So there's the painting that I chose. So I'm curious to know what you think about Edward Hopper, and whether you think it kind of resonates with our feelings of the last year, sort of sitting around in buildings, isolated from other people. And, you know, is that a bleak picture, or is there actually something kind of positive or hopeful, or there's potential there? They're pondering, and maybe there's a you know, even for us as Christians, there's a kind of a room for an idea of prayer or meditation that might lead to something new and transformative. Anyway, so Edward Hopper, that was the first set of paintings I was going to show this evening. Now, before I get to look at the illustrations from children's books and comics, let me read these other Bible passages. Matthew 6, these are the words of Jesus, famous words. He says, whenever you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, so that they may be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they've received their reward. But whenever you pray, go into your room and shut the door, and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And then Matthew 18. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" He called a child whom he put among them and said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever becomes humble like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me." Those readings, just a couple of thoughts. When we pray, Jesus says it's to be a private thing. God can see your inner thoughts, and you're able to talk to him like a father. And then in the second reading, Jesus is commending children for something that they bring, an innocence or a trust, which makes it makes them actually a kind of useful guide for us in how to be humble before God. So those are some of the thoughts that hopefully will feed into these next bits that we're going to look at. Right, coming to that in a sec. Our inner world, our inner thoughts, can be quite noisy. I don't know if it is for you, but I feel like we often have a number of competing voices in our heads. I think we even saw that with Jesus when he was tempted by the devil. I like to think that encounter was probably less like that strange winged creature trying to sort of tempt him with stones, but actually it was more like thoughts in his head that he had to do battle with. A really interesting book that my Rachel got me onto a while ago is this one called A Book of Silence by a lady called Sarah Maitland. She's quite a strange lady. She's become very, very almost obsessed with the idea of becoming more, of finding out about silence. And she says our lives have become so busy and noisy that we've lost, or we don't understand the benefits of silence. And so she takes herself off to wilderness places, including deserts and mountaintops. And she now lives in a very rural part of Ireland. And she lives in the silence. And one of the things that she talks about is that those voices in your head get louder. And I guess we might think that at an extreme end, it becomes almost like a kind of madness. People are alone, talking to each other. They're hearing voices in their head. She says it needn't be a kind of madness. It's more, you become more aware because there are less noises out there, more aware of the different competing voices within you saying different things to you. She also says, which I think is amazing, is that in extreme survival situations where people have been in wildernesses, she gives the story of a man who broke his leg falling while he was coming down a mountain, and he had to hobble down to the camp, and he thought he would die. But he said there was a voice in his head basically saying to him what he needed to hear. Keep going, don't stop, you've got this, keep going ahead, you're going to be fine, you're going to survive. And then as soon as he arrived, he sort of collapsed in a heap, he received medical help, and that voice went away. What was that voice? Was it God? Was it something in him that was trying to take charge and say, to survive, we need to do this? So she has a lot to say about voices. I'll leave that with you, whether or not you hear voices in your head. But I suggest that we have a complex of different passions and voices and stories that are working inside us, and it's hard to unpack them. This came to light in this film a few years ago by Pixar. It's a children's film, you might have seen it, Inside Out. And it's about this girl in the corner, Riley, her name is, and she's just moved house with her family, and so she's feeling very unsettled and somewhat in shock. And the film takes place inside her head, where all of these different characters represent emotions of hers: fear, anger, joy, disgust, sadness. And we meet other characters that live inside her head, including her make-believe, how children have a make-believe friend inside their head called Bing Bong. Anyway, that's who that is, pink character. And she has to sort of sift and discern and work out what's happening to her. All right, thank you for coming with me on this. I will get to to the pictures, don't you worry. So final bit on this. Let me suggest that one way to try to help come to terms with those variety of voices in us is to be aware of various stages. I've really borrowed this from the novelist Marilyn Robinson, because her characters work through this stuff. When something happens, you react, and then it's as if there's a loud voice speaking. Then you might a bit later reflect on it and think, well, actually I could have done better, or I know better than that, and you have a sort of rethink. And then as a Christian, there's a third voice, which is that you bring in the voice of God, and you say, actually, God, what would you have me do? And I come as a child to a loving parent. What's a prayerful response? What's a creative response? Let me try and give an example to make it sort of a bit more grounded. Saturday night, I'm relaxing. I've had a beer. I'm also slightly thinking about church on Sunday. Doorbell rings at about 9:30. The doorbell rings. I feel grumpy. Who is it? Why have they rung the doorbell? I see in the little box, it's nobody I know. I open the door, and it's somebody asking for money and giving me a sob story, which does happen. And my immediate reactions are quite negative. I'm very happy to be honest about this. I don't want to be dealing with this person right now, and I don't know how to interpret their story, and I don't really know how to help them with their many complex needs. And then maybe even just a few seconds later, a slightly more nuanced voice comes along. Perhaps it's my conscience, who sort of says, now come on, Dave, you can do this. You're a vicar. This person might be in need. And I might say to them, well, I can't give you money, but would you like some food? And I'll go to the kitchen and I'll try to fix a little bit of packed lunch for them. And then I can promise you that this doesn't happen as often as it should. I might be able to say, okay, Jesus or Spirit of God, what would you have me do in this situation? My reaction was this. My reflection is this. What is a prayerful response now? Because this person is loved by you. They're made in your image. They are a child of God. And I want to love them, even though it is the least convenient time for me to do so. And it might be that I feel prompted to do something different. I may feel prompted actually to give a little bit of money. So sometimes I do, especially when a person visits for the very first time. If they are a repeat knocker, I tend to say, well, maybe there's more. I don't want to just be a handout to you, but I will try to hear their story, ask good questions. Tell me about yourself. What's your name? Where have you come from? What sort of day have you had? And then I might try to pray for them. I can offer that. And that I would say is an attempt. I do not always get it right, believe you me, to listen to the third voice. Does this make some sense, by the way? You're tracking with me. We will get to the pictures. So this is the kind of trying to understand our inner world. Let me get us to these comics then. So I loved comics and kids' books, and I loved them for their illustrations as well when I was a child. So I'm going to just bring actually 5 to you. And it's not even so much about the art, it's about what they represent. Why, are comics really art? You might say, somebody might say, is it a valid thing to be looking at? I would say, yes, it is. Some comic strips or children's illustrations can be very beautiful and profound and moving. Not all of them are, but some of them can be. They're often very educational. I would use comics with my students when I was teaching English, and I used them for myself to learn Portuguese, because you have a mixture of the pictures and the words. And many kids' Bibles are kind of in comic form, and tend to be more interesting than this time.
Dave, your audio is fading out. I don't know if
I might have put there we are. I might have put. Is that a bit better? I might have put my notes on.
Something a little bit hissy as well.
Okay. Oh well, I'll battle on. So I think comics are valid, or some of them anyway. Some of the advantages, many come in strips with panels in a row that create a narrative, and that's a bit like our stained glass, where you have a kind of story going through. So here's here's Calvin, Calvin and Hobbs. I'll say a bit about that in a minute. He's brought a butterfly to show his friend Hobbs. Look, I caught a butterfly. Hobbs represents wisdom, or at least the view of the animals. And he says, if people could put rainbows in zoos, they'd do it. And now Calvin has moved from reaction to reflection. And he's thinking, maybe I don't need to actually trap this butterfly. And he releases it. So they often depict a child facing the big world. And they are often without the help of adults. So all 5 of these that I've chosen, adults are absent. They don't have the help of a loving parent. I'll explain about that in just a sec. But they do have a loyal friend with them, helping them to understand. Often it's an animal, interestingly. By the way, I realized I wanted to wind back now. In this previous panel, in that last section about a child to a loving parent, I just had our stained glass window there from St. John's. I don't know if you remember when Jesus was baptized, just before he went into the wilderness, he had the voice of God tell him, "You are my son, whom I love. With you I am well pleased." And I believe that voice, Jesus, knowing that he was loved by his Father, allowed him to overcome the devil and to go into the wilderness and do the things that he was going to do. I meant to mention that before. So all of these comics have these things in common: a child facing the big world without the help of adults, but with a loyal friend. Comics are useful as well because they have thought bubbles. I put a thought bubble there, and a thought bubble allows you to see the inner thoughts of a character. Only they're thinking that, and others can't necessarily read it. So Calvin and Hobbs, again. Calvin and Hobbs was a comic strip from 1984 to 95. And when we visited my American family, the newspapers would all have these comics in them, and they would have a crop of comics on Sunday, the funnies, they would call them. And I would always take my uncle's paper and just read all the comics. I just loved it. And Calvin and Hobbs was one of my favorite. The premise of Calvin and Hobbs, it ran for 11 years, is that Calvin is a 6-year-old boy. He's an only child. There are adults in his life, but they don't understand him, his parents and his teacher. And his favorite thing in the world, a bit like some of you mentioned your books were your friends, or even your children's books are their friends, for Calvin is Hobbs. Hobbs is a stuffed tiger. And so in the bottom left-hand corner, that is what Hobbs looks like whenever an adult is looking at him. But whenever Calvin looks at Hobbs, it is a living creature, and he's actually bigger and taller, and it's his friend who's a tiger. And that's a really interesting dynamic in the comic, because it means that Calvin's inner world involves Hobbs, but nobody else can see it. It's like Hobbs is part of his thoughts in a way that the adults don't get to see. So that's where I say that the adults are absent, because they can't see Hobbs. And Hobbs is often very wise. And so there's this very deep one at the top here. Calvin, they're often very funny and ludicrous, but sometimes they're very profound. Calvin says, "Let's say life is this square of the sidewalk. We're born at this crack and we die at that crack. Now we find ourselves somewhere inside the square. And in the process of walking out of it, suddenly we realize our time in here is fleeting. Our quick experience here pointless? Does anything we say or do in here really matter? Have we done anything important? Have we been happy? Have we made the most of these precious few footsteps?" Fast forward, they've been pondering this for so long, it's actually become night, and they haven't left the square on the sidewalk. Somebody on Tuesday night said, "That last panel describes me exactly right now." Anyway, which I thought was interesting. So that's Calvin and Hobbs, and I'm a huge fan, and I've got all the books, and I love reading them with my kids as well. Peanuts and Charlie Brown's probably more famous. Bill Watterson, who drew Calvin and Hobbs, was greatly inspired by Charles Schulz, and Peanuts ran for more than 50 years. And in Peanuts, the children there are no adults. They're always off screen or out of sight. Sometimes you hear sort of what they're saying via the children's reactions, but the adults are never there. So again, the missing adults. And Charlie Brown, the main character, the bald kid, or mostly bald, whenever he needs to think and ponder, he often goes to this wall it's like his thinking wall, and he sits there leaning on it, and he ponders great things, including about God, the universe, and everything. He's often there with Linus, his friend. Linus has a comfort blanket, and he's often there with Snoopy, his dog. So there's a little picture of Charlie Brown's wall. Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh. I don't know if some of you would have read these. Beautifully illustrated. That illustration, apparently, an original by E.H. Shepard, sold for more than $1 million at Sotheby's or wherever it was. And Christopher Robin is a boy in a 100-acre wood, you'll know it. And he has all these animal friends, and they each represent a different voice. Winnie the Pooh, Piglet. Eeyore is the more grumpy one. Owl is the more wise one. Tigger is the more excitable one, and so on. And he sort of processes problems together with these animals. No adults. I watched the film about it, and in the film they talk about how in the First World War, I think, or was it the Second World War? Anyway, a number of soldiers said how profoundly they felt helped by the simplicity of Winnie the Pooh, of a child in a idyllic forest with his little friends, and how that was a helpful escape for them. And then just finally, thank you for bearing with me. I just thought this was a really interesting. It's the front cover from one of the early editions of the Narnia book, and obviously that's Aslan the lion, and there are Lucy and Susan, and again, no adults. In fact, there are no adults really before they go to Narnia, because they've been sent away from their parents in the war, and then they go away again through the wardrobe, and they get to be kings and queens as children. But the helpful larger animal is Aslan, and Lucy is the one who can see and hear Aslan the best, even though she's the youngest and sort of most innocent. In each of these cases, whether it's Winnie the Pooh or Hobbs, the friend is a loyal friend. They may have different characteristics. Aslan is very much meant to be Jesus. Hobbs is not. I don't think Hobbs is meant to be Jesus. He's just a loyal and close friend. And the last one is Charlie Mcassy, who's become very famous in the last couple of years for his drawings, which have been made into a book. So I've got here the boy, the mole, the fox, and the horse. My Rach has been putting a few of these out on our fence. If you want to see a few more and you're walking by, you can see a few. And then if you go to Marble Hill Park, someone has put a bunch of them on display around Marble Hill Park, if you go and walk around there. And his art and his vision, if you like, I think has really caught on in lockdown. People have really found it very, very helpful. Again, the premise is a child. We don't know anything about this child. No parents, no adults. And he's surrounded by these animals. And the wisest, I think, and the biggest is the horse. So the horse is similar to God. Maybe not actually God, but similar. So here's just one picture. It says, "When things are difficult, remember who you are." "Who am I?" asked the boy. "You are loved," said the horse, which is very similar to what Jesus heard his father saying to him when he was baptized. So thank you for bearing with me on my little show and tell where I get to talk about my favorite kids' books. But I'm trying to get to an idea that these children's books, they often come back to a child finding it hard in the world without help, who finds a loving, loyal companion who can listen and be there and offer wisdom and guidance. And I think that is the heart yearning for God. That is the inner world of what we believe as Christians, but written in these books for children. That's my theory. Do you agree? Do you like the art? Perhaps you have other ones to contribute. So we'll pause there, guys. Thank you for bearing with me. And I'll stop the recording as well.